It definitely does. And so we had that conversation, and then you went away because you'd only written a third of the book, and I needed a complete manuscript.
That's right.
So what was that time like for you?
I vanished for a while, and I won't say the majority of that time, and it was a good chunk of time. It was almost 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
We had a tentative date that the thing was supposed to be delivered at, and I definitely didn't want to be one of these authors who, you know, sort of doesn't deliver on time. I didn't deliver on time.
Almost when delivered on time.
That's good to know. I was a little bit worried about it, but I knew where the book needed to go. There's story in the book, but not a lot of story. It's not a melodrama. It's actually an accretion of detail. And the real challenge of the book was making sure I found the right details that belonged in this book. I didn't want it to be a book written by Wikipedia, so there was actually very little of that. I wanted it to be a book based in observation and experience and memory and invention. So what was hard was not knowing what needed to go into the book, but finding the, I use this word advisedly, the mental health to be able to put it down as it needed to be put down. It's an introspective book, and in many parts, not just introspective, it's actually quite morose. And I found that to evoke those emotions convincingly, you actually need to get into them, and that's very hard on you. So the majority of those 2 years I wasn't writing, I was avoiding, but then I would sort of go into it for 2 weeks at a time. And I would eat very badly and not shower. And I would be a rather difficult person to live with. I mean, not yelling or being unpleasant, but just really sealed off inside this mode. And then I'll come out of it and enjoy normal life so much, knowing that I would have to go back again. So that's why it took so long, because I knew that I absolutely could not afford to drop the voice, because I knew the book lived up or died on the voice and the truth of the voice. But meanwhile, it's not something, you don't just wake up one bright morning and write the next chapter. So.
Right. When you sent it to me, what were your thoughts when you sent the full manuscript?
So I finished it in late summer of 2009.
Yes.
In late summer of 2009, and the last bit of it was, when you read the book you'll understand this, but I had written chapter 21, and then I went back, and for those last 2 weeks I wrote chapter 19 and 20 in the sort of fever of trying to put it down exactly. And the afternoon I finished, I put it down and I walked out into my neighborhood. I live in Sunset Park in Brooklyn, and it's a Mexican area, and I went to a restaurant I had never been in before, and it was very dark inside. It had a disco ball, and there were some rather unsavory looking characters there, and I ordered enough food for about 4 people, and I made sure I ordered things on the menu that I had never seen before, never ordered before, so I had no idea. And I just sort of like ate a lot and smiled at strangers, and you know, and then you know, I went back home and took the mother of all showers. So that I knew there was a lot of work to come, but it was just an amazing feeling to know that you know, that he didn't kill me.
It's interesting you said earlier that actually it started with Julius's mother. That was the first seed, perhaps. And once I read it, and one of the first things that I was asking you about was his mother. I wanted more of his mother, really more of his family.
So this book is, a few people have sort of said, you know, it's, well, it is sort of, so I haven't just said it's true, it's kind of deadly serious. But it's a work of mourning, and there's a place for that, and I think it's a book that needed to be written. I think there's a place for it. But I do insist that there's one joke in the book, which is that it's a book about a psychiatrist who doesn't tell you about his mother.
I didn't buy it. I insisted.
So this was sort of our first. This was our first sort of head-to-head about the book and questions of balance. Julius is estranged from his mother, Julianne. So Julius was raised in Nigeria, and his mother is German and his father's Nigerian. And from quite an early age, he sort of drifted away from his mother. Now his father died; the only two of them left, and he doesn't talk to her. The story I was going to tell originally was a story of a German woman who's estranged from her half Nigerian son, but I ended up doing it the other way around. And so the first draft, as David received it, had very little about Julianne. And there's actually a reason for this. It's because in the process of thinking about the book and structuring the story and living with these characters, I had come up with very detailed and sophisticated life histories for all of them. So much that I knew that it did not end up in the book at all. One thing, for example, is I know Julius's birthday. I know his last name, of course, and that's not in the book. And all of these things I needed to sort of like have theirs to make him, you know, solid and real to me. And then there was all this backstory about his family, his mother and what she did and who she was and what the source of the conflict between them was, or some aspect of it. Something about her life and what she had suffered through, what his grandparents did. I knew all of these things.
And I knew you knew them. I mean,
and I knew you. I knew. No, I didn't. So those things were there, but then the laconic aspect of the writer takes over, right? Where you just, I self-edit pretty ruthlessly, and I tend to err on the side of giving you too little. Because I know that, well, I mean, this is what I admire in the writers that I love, and probably 4 of my 5 favorite novels are under 200 pages long. So I left all of this stuff out, but including, as it turns out, and this was, I think, a very crucial editing intervention, a little bit of Julianne's backstory.
Yeah.
I had been afraid to put it in because I did not want to introduce a drama into the book in that sense. I wasn't sure how I would handle it tonally. But we found a way to get it in there.
We did, or you did. And the other, along those same lines, what I also asked you for a couple times, if I recall, maybe more than a couple, might be your recollection, was about the grandmother. He makes this important trip to Brussels, at 50 pages of the book maybe in Brussels, and it really is the transition from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, and thematically it's significant. And the reason he says he's going to Brussels is because he knows that's the last place he knew where his maternal grandmother lived, and so. But Julius, in that draft, Julius just says this, and then goes to Brussels and makes no effort to find the grandmother. And I just said, I I said, that's unacceptable. He would do something, make some motion. Although I knew that this man wouldn't hire a private detective, that's not the kind of man he is. I knew he would not spend 3 weeks hunting her down, but he would make some motions.
Right, and in that case, it turned out that all that needed to happen was a few structural things, a few mentions sprinkled through the text at important places, because then the reader sort of keeps this in mind, like, oh, she sort of keeps coming up, so she's on his mind. And I think this was a genuine, I love the book the way it ended up, particularly with those issues, his mother, his grandmother, but in the editing of it, it was a point of, it was a challenging point. It was a genuine conflict, because I'm allergic to anything that smacks of the Countess swept into the room, and then she said, you know, I really don't. I believe that if the sensibility is right, the story is right. First of all. And then there are structural issues that you take care of, and we did a lot of work on that later on, but I always want to start with the sensibility, and I guess I had a bit of fear about bringing it too much telenovela action. But, you know, since the book was about memory and erasure, and precisely about the way that loss has a way of reverberating, it actually made sense to evoke Julius, who is so incredibly sensitive to loss. It made sense to evoke the rather dramatic losses that his mother had suffered, and that his mother's mother had suffered. So it was something I knew. I knew that Julius's mother had been born in Berlin in 1945, and I hadn't mentioned it. But not mentioning it was taking obliqueness one step too far, because it is an important part of his story to have that sort of echoing in the background.